Hello, and thank you for joining us for Long Beach Symphony's Musically Speaking series, hosted by our music director, Eckart Preu. I'm Kelly Lucera. I'm president of the Long Beach Symphony, and we are so excited to bring you this virtual series featuring interviews with world-famous performers, conductors, and composers. This evening, we are thrilled to welcome longtime friend of Long Beach Symphony, POPS guest conductor, Matt Catingub. And now, please welcome to our virtual stage, Long Beach Symphony Music Director Eckart Preu and the uber-talented Long Beach Pops guest conductor and friend of the Symphony, Grammy Award-winning Matt Catingub.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you, Matt Catingub, for being here with us today. Welcome.
It is a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Matt, it's so nice to speak with you today. You are an amazing musician and you come from an amazing family. You're the son of Mavis Rivers, who was a phenomenal jazz singer. I was just actually listening to her earlier today, and she was just phenomenal. So she was born in Samoa and is known as Polynesia's First Lady of Song. So what was it like growing up in that musical household, and how did your family and your mother in particular shape your musical career? Or did you ever resist? I know my kids don't want to have anything with my kind of music.
Well, I can tell you that I'm the younger of two brothers, and so my older brother was unfortunately fell victim to the hey, let's give him lessons and make him force him in the music, and unfortunately it had the wrong effect. He it was of the age where it was like, well, almost rebellious. He's like, no, I don't want to do this. I want to, play football or whatever he wanted to do. So when I came along 5 years later, they kind of let me do what I wanted to do. And so what I did was I ended up just being a kid and going into my mom's record library. And do we need to explain what a record is? I'm not sure. The 12-inch vinyl. But I'd literally go in there and I'd dig out my mom's albums, and there was pictures of my mommy, right? And so I was fascinated that my mom had her own recordings, her own albums. So I that's how I started. I listened to my mom's recordings. Her first recording was arranged by the great Nelson Riddle, Frank Sinatra's arranger. So I mean, this is how I grew up. So because I wasn't pushed very hard, I just took to music as easily as one could imagine. I had a piano in the house, and I just would sit down and start, finding tunes and finding some Beatles songs that I was really into, and and just kind of went from there, and then kind of went into school, and then things started blossoming. So yeah, having mom be as great as she was, and in the music business, yeah, that had almost everything to do with me getting into music.
Right. And so you had a piano around the house. I know you play the saxophone. Are you self-taught, or did you go to college to learn these instruments?
Okay, let's be very clear here. I'm not advocating how I'm about to answer your questions. No, I didn't take any lessons. I taught myself how to play piano from a very young age. I didn't take piano lessons. Then in junior high, they started offering, instrumental music programs. Fortunately, back in LA, they had instrumental music programs. And so my mother took a look at the list, and she said, here, why don't you learn how to play clarinet and be another Benny Goodman? And I said, well, who's Benny Goodman? Right. I was an ignorant little kid. Well, that's what I started on. I started on clarinet in school and started playing in the band. And then one thing led to another, and the band director needed a saxophonist to play in the jazz band. So he said, here, and he sent me home with his saxophone. And I just started tinkering on that. Obviously, going from clarinet to saxophone is a very easy transition. So by the time I was a senior in high school, I was really more of a saxophone player than I was a piano player. And so as I left high school, that's where I started. And to answer your question about college, people ask me that all the time, and I always say I went to the old school, because when I came out of high school, I went right on the road, and I was playing on the road with big bands like Louis Bellson and Toshiko Akiyoshi and all these great big bands of the late 70s and early 80s, and that's where I got my I cut my teeth really on those. That's how I started, really.
Yeah. That's actually true for all performing arts. Actually, you never really know how to play until you play with someone else.
That's right.
Until you play for an audience, because in the room anybody can play, but
that's right.
You're not a performer that way. So that's interesting that you went that way. I'm kind of curious. How important, being a German in America, how important is your Polynesian heritage to you, and how does this heritage manifest itself in your daily life?
Wow. Well, I've been proud for years. I was so proud of my mom. Obviously, not a lot of Samoan musicians, let alone singers, let alone jazz singers, make it out of Samoa into the U.S. and get to do an album with Nelson Riddle. So obviously, I was very proud of that. My mother first brought me to Samoa when I was in my mid-20s. And I've since been back a few times now. And about 15 years ago, I was very fortunate to have been bestowed an actual Samoan chief title. So I'm actually an actual Samoan chief. They recognize the fact that I'm Samoan. I'm part Samoan, by the way, but they recognize me as their own because you don't think there's many Samoan jazz singers, not a lot of Samoan symphonic conductors out there either. So they recognize me with a chief's title, and I'm so very proud of that, obviously. And it is, it's something I hold near and dear to my heart. I will throw this out. I do throw this out on stage once in a while. I'm the last title holder of the king who had passed away about 15 years ago. The gentleman who got the title before me was Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. So yeah, I know people look at me and confuse me sometimes with Dwayne Johnson. Anyway, but yeah, I'm very proud of that heritage. My mom was actually born in Samoa, but raised in New Zealand. So I've spent a fair amount of time in New Zealand as well. So it's my Polynesian heritage is very important to me.
Right. Yeah. And naturally, with the background of your mother and the music you were surrounded by, you lean towards jazz, performing and arranging. Were you drawn at any time in your career to other classical genres and composers as well? I mean, and I won't be offended if you say no, it's totally fine. So did you have like a classical favorite pianist or composer or performer that you feel inspired by, or that you wish you could perform with?
Well, I will tell you this, Eckart. I will, you asked me what school I went to. I will probably have one of my life's regrets is that I didn't go to school for formal training, and certainly for conducting. I respect folks like you who know what they're doing up there. I just get up there, me wave stick. I mean, I learned how to conduct on the job. I was working for a singer, Jack Jones, one of the great singers of traditional pop music. And, we were doing he was sitting where he goes, we're doing a symphony. Have you ever conducted a symphony before? No. So I literally trial by fire. I was thrown in, and he's like, I just had to learn how to conduct, right? And just kind of, and I embarrassed myself the first few times. But, to answer your question, I don't want to sound cliche, but yeah, obviously the Debussy Ravel thing. I mean, hey, that's the beginning of modern music, is it not? I mean, so obviously I was into that, and of course Gershwin. I even, did an entire CD of Gershwin music. So, but if there's a regret in my life, it was that I didn't really focus a lot more in the classical world. Had I known I was going to be entering the world of symphonic orchestras and doing my fair share of conducting, I probably would have, maybe not gone to the old school and actually tried to learn the repertoire and really do it. But I think in my life, I have tried to, at least on my own, just try to immerse myself. I'm one of those musicians who thinks music is music. Duke Ellington said it best, there's either good music or bad music. And I think, I love all types of music, and classical music is definitely one of them. I wish I could say I was a little more, expert in it, as are you. Anyway, I just love it all.
Yeah, we are all learning, and you know what? So first time, the first couple of years conducting an orchestra, it's always full of embarrassment and mistakes.
Yes. Oh, yes.
We don't have an instrument to practice with, so
No.
it's our first time. And speaking of conducting, so you've worked as a conductor, you know, with Hawaii Pops in Honolulu, with the Honolulu Symphony, Hawaii Symphony, and now you're in you're the co-founder, I think, of the Macon Pops
right.
in Georgia. So how did you bridge, and what was the reason to bridge that gap, you know, from a jazz performer, band leader, which is one thing, an arranger, and then conducting a symphony orchestra, which is like a whole new world.
Right. Absolutely. Well, like I said, I was dropped into the world, kicking and screaming, and but as I learned, at the more orchestras I would conduct for, because I conducted for Jack and also for Tony Tennille and a bunch of other, Rosemary Clooney, a lot of great artists and a lot of huge orchestras too. I mean, to be thrown up there and just say, here, you know, here, you're conducting the LA Philharmonic. Oh, well, okay, here I go. It became more natural the more and more I did it. You mentioned the Honolulu Symphony. That's, again, I've been very lucky in my career. The Honolulu Symphony came along in the late 90s. A friend of mine had me come over to conduct a show for him. And the executive director at the time came up to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about doing this on a full-time basis? And I said, you mean Pops conducting? He said, yeah. Are you interested? And I said, well, of course I'm interested. And again, there I was. I was the Pops conductor of the Honolulu Symphony. So I actually took my experiences from what I had done in my career, which was composing and arranging for all these great artists, but then knowing that I could literally combine it with the fact that I had this full-time orchestra that I could write for. I think that's what it really was the most exciting, because me, I'm probably more of an orchestrator, arranger. That's probably my biggest forte. To be able to have that at my disposal was amazing. So my first season, I would bring in, you know, I did bring in Rosemary Clooney and Glenn Campbell and Kenny Rogers, and they needed charts, they needed arrangements. So I was able to write a lot of those for them. So at the same time, I'm learning how to orchestrate and arrange for orchestras and learning how to conduct. You know, in the first half, of course, we do orchestral pieces and you know, orchestra only pieces. And so I literally learned on the job, and I'm so grateful to those fantastic musicians for their patience, for putting up with me. But I was able to kind of take it from there. And then now here I am. I'm, you know, some 20 some years later, and I'm still doing it and loving every time I get to stand and share the stage with these fantastic musicians.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking about pops for orchestras, when you do pops in Hawaii, and this may be a two-part question. So when you do pops in Hawaii, does the pops repertoire different from the mainland pops programming? And then part two is kind of in general, like, where do you see the future of pops programming? I mean, is the audience changing, or do you see the demands of the audience changing?
Well, I'll get to that second part. I think that's the tougher question to answer because of this little thing called a pandemic we're going through. But to answer your first question, we didn't necessarily have in Hawaii, we didn't necessarily have Hawaiian style pops music. What happened though was, see, Hawaii is its own little microcosm of music. Hawaiian music is huge in Hawaii. There are a lot of huge artists and styles. So what I ended up doing is every first half of every Honolulu Symphony Pops concert we did featured either an established Hawaiian artist or an up-and-coming Hawaiian artist. So that really became something I enjoyed and started doing almost as much as I could as I moved on, and instead I started doing orchestras other than Hawaii. But we would feature these artists or groups in the first half. And we were able to do that because I wrote their arrangements. So they'd come on and do, 3 or 4 tunes, and then maybe we do some standard repertoire. We started with some of the standard pop stuff that there was in the library, but it got to the point where it was like, we need some new stuff. So I did lots of writing for the first half. So I have an incredible backlog of pops music for orchestras that I've done over the years. So to answer your question, we didn't really do Hawaiian pops, but as I've moved on and graduated to other orchestras, I loved being able to feature local talent. I think that's so awesome for the community, and obviously for the artist to be able to, and I will say, I've been able to write the arrangements for some of the biggest artists in the world and to premiere their shows, like people like Kenny Loggins and Michael McDonald and James Ingram and Toto and bands like they'd never performed with symphonies, but even at the level to watch someone like Kenny Loggins, when I first wrote his book, to stand in front of a 65, 70 piece orchestra, really for the first time, because these guys, when they do their recordings and they have their arrangements where they've maybe overdubbed a string section on one of their tunes on their recordings, it's not quite the same thing as standing in front of a 65 or 70 piece orchestra. So I had the pleasure of seeing some of the biggest artists in the world just turn around and go, wow, this is an amazing experience, right? So I'm veering off subject here, but I'm saying the orchestra world has just given me so much pleasure to see the pleasure on the faces of some of these up and coming artists as well. And I just think that's a fantastic thing. And to answer the last part of your question, a lot of what we do, the Macon Pops down near Atlanta, which has been, we're going into our ninth season next year, has been kind of almost a running experiment for me and for my musical partner Steve Moretti. We're doing, because it's kind of this interesting conglomeration of great musicians, a lot of them from the Atlanta area. They come down, but we're able to, it's like a laboratory. It's been like a pops laboratory for me. I've been able to do things I never would have thought I could do with major orchestras. And I've been able to take some of those ideas, like putting a dance floor down in front, like Long Beach has been doing for years, but a lot of these orchestras haven't thought about that. But to do things like that and really turn it into a nightclub atmosphere, those are some of the experiments we've been doing. So because of that, it's almost like a proving ground to see how things work. Certain themes, certain music, some very, very current. Next year, we're doing a show with nothing but pop music from after the year 2000. Nothing but current music. So I kind of think that I've always thought that the direction of pops really needs to just kind of change for the times. It needs to bring in that younger audience, and we can probably go on and on and on about the demographics of pops, but I just think as long as I have the opportunity to be able to create the arrangements and feature the orchestra in a way that they're not taking a back seat, and then start doing music of very current generations, I think that's really going to be the future of pops.
Yeah, right. You have such a multi-faceted career in performing, arranging. You did even some film music for George Clooney's movie Good Night and Good Luck, and won a Grammy for that, which is absolutely amazing. And you are right now, as I hear, in the middle of a big recording project called From Samoa to Sinatra, which is usually two names you don't really put together.
Nope. No.
So what can you tell us a little bit about that project? What is it about?
I can. Thank you for asking. A lot of us are looking at this pandemic, and it's, who knows where orchestras are going to be, where the music business is going to be, where is live music going to be after this? But when this all came down and I knew I had the time, I knew I wanted to start and complete a project I've always wanted to do, which is basically a tribute to not only my biggest hero, which is Frank Sinatra, but also to my mother, my other big hero. So that's where the title of From Samoa to Sinatra came from, my mother being the Samoan. My mother was the very first artist signed by Frank Sinatra in 1960 to his Reprise recording label. And it was Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., my mother, her name is Mavis Rivers, and some other album by Peppino the Italian Mouse, which we don't need to talk about. But so she literally was at the beginning of one of the most fertile periods of that kind of music. You know, Sinatra, the Rat Pack, all that. My mother was performing with all those guys up at the Calneva in Lake Tahoe, down here in Las Vegas. So I really wanted to find a vehicle where I could not only honor Sinatra, but also my mother. And musically, it's kind of the same thing, really. So, but my producer, my dear friend Alan Sverdov, came to me and said that the Sirius XM radio network is interested in the project. So I actually did about 3 tracks the end of last year, and I completed those kind of as a trial run, if you will. And they were sent to Sirius XM, and they've been playing them in a regular rotation. And I'm getting a lot of people saying, "Is that you? I just heard on and yeah, that was me." So I am now about to complete the entire project. There's going to be about 14 tunes, all featuring, you know, these great traditional pop standards that were recorded not only by Mr. Sinatra, but also by my mother. But what's really great for me is that I was able to obtain all of my mother's recording masters from Warner Brothers Records. So all the multi-track masters, which means I've been able to take my mom's isolated voice and I've been able to do some interesting singing, duets, vocalizing with some vocal groups and things like that. But probably the premiere track, which will be out very soon, is it's a duet for me and my mom. But the most interesting thing is when my mom signed with Reprise Records, she was pregnant with me. And when she recorded this particular song, she was pregnant with me. So I'm duetting with my mother while I'm in her stomach some many years later. So it's obviously a project that's very near and dear to my heart. And I'm very appreciative of the Sirius XM folks for being interested, and they're going to be playing the hell out of it, I hope. And this is all actually going to be a focus of my coming symphonic shows. I hope to do it very soon with the Long Beach Symphony from Samoa to Sinatra, because it's obviously I'm going to be orchestrating it for the whole orchestra there. So that's my main project, and you know I've made good use of this pandemic time.
Yeah. It sounds like an amazing project, and we certainly hope to have you back in Long Beach very soon. So. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Lucera, who will lead the Q&A portion of this interview. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Matt. It is so good to see you again. And that comment about your mom being pregnant with you when you were duetting together was very moving. So thank you for that moment. Thank you both for letting us be part of this interesting conversation. Just a reminder to the audience that if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. And we do have some questions. And the first one is from Annie. She would like to know, for both of you, what's your favorite show you performed or memory you have on stage with the Long Beach Symphony?
Ooh. Who's going first?
You go first. Matt. You go first.
Boy, you know what? Some of my greatest memories on stage are with the Long Beach Symphony. And Kelly, my kudos to you and to the orchestra for the years I've been coming there, because I have to say, you know, performing for that many people, that many enthusiastic people, and seeing the dance floors out there, and it's just, I just love the atmosphere. And I don't know if I could pick one favorite moment, because we've had so many fun shows. I loved it when we had Hapa there, the Hawaiian, because they were my dear friends from Hawaii that I, you know, first did their symphonic show with them. And I also remember doing our Jazz That Rocks show, because we premiered it with you guys. And I've taken that show throughout the years. So those are probably my 2 favorites.
I don't know. Same here. You know, there's so many great moments. I think for me, It was, of course, my audition concert because it's you know, the first encounter with the orchestra was such an amazing experience, and doing Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony with them. Since then, we've done so many great things. I loved our Spanish program with Pepe Romero. I loved our South and North American program with Copeland and Bernstein West Side Story. And so I've done one POPs concert, which was, and I was warned, Kelly warned me, said that's going to be an amazing experience because you've never seen anything like it. And it was true. I had never seen anything like it. That was a holiday POPs show a couple of years ago. And I'm looking forward to next time. And it's just, I mean, the POPs is something very, very, very special too. And very, very dear to my heart as well.
And Tracy asks you, Matt, what's it like to win a Grammy?
Well, you know what? I was part of a very large team that put together the soundtrack for Good Night and Good Luck. It was really, I got to work with the great Diane Reeves, who was in her own right is one of the great jazz singers, and but she was kind of, we were all live. I have to tell the story. We were all live on the set when we did the movie. And of course, George's aunt, it was the great Rosemary Clooney. So that's how I got to be involved with George and all of us that got to be there. But I have to say this because if anyone's ever seen the movie, we're all playing and Diane is singing. Every note we're playing is live on the set with just 2 cameras and just a few mics. And we did it with kind of like how they would have done it in the mid-50s with just a few mics and everything. So my kudos, my hats, I always, when I get a chance, my hat's always off to George Clooney for doing that, for actually us not pretending to play and actually record the music. So it was, that was just an honor to be part of that whole project.
Wonderful. Randy would like to know, how does a conductor do his or her thing? How is the task approached? Do you have a particular process going into every concert that's unique?
Eckart?
His or her thing. That's a very interesting question. Like in terms of concert preparation or so, I think that's where this is going. I like to go to the beach. At some point when I'm at Long Beach, I like to be at the beach, during the morning, and then taking a nap, and then kind of very, very, very slowly eating a little bit, and then kind of getting my mind just into concert mode, which is basically looking at scores, getting dressed. I think the process of getting dressed is for me a very interesting psychological, because as soon as you put the tails on, you put the baton in your hand, all of a sudden something switches in your brain. And that's kind of how I built myself up from relaxing on the beach to actually being ready for the concert.
Me?
Yeah.
Kelly?
Sure.
Vastly different from Eckart, because a POPs concert, especially POPs concerts that I'm involved with, tend to be on the loose side. And I know Kelly will agree. I like to keep the concerts incredibly loose and very spur of the moment. Maybe some of the listeners out there or the viewers out there are bugged at me because I never print the program because I love to have people be surprised. And so when it comes to preparation, almost none. I mean, when we rehearse, I almost call it just a run through, because that's what we do. We just run the stuff through and we just have a good time, because I want to make sure when we get on the stage that myself and all the performers I'm with and the orchestra are just having a real good time. Very different from what Eckart has to do, because the music I normally do is, and especially since I perform a lot of the music I do, it's a whole different kind of preparation. And Eckart, hats off to you, because again, as we were speaking earlier, prepping for that type of concert is a whole different beast. And I respect very much what you do.
On the other hand, I'm not doing it well with improvisation, so I give the hat right back.
Matt Stewart asks, you wear so many hats. Is there one that is more artistically satisfying than others?
Um, I mentioned something to Eckart as we were talking, and I grew up in LA, and I had my first big band when I was 20, and my mother was my first chick singer, and I'm saying that as not in an offensive way. We used to laugh about that, but back then I enjoyed so much arranging. I enjoyed arranging and composing for the big band and getting a chance to do that. I think one of the things later in my career, especially as I got into symphony orchestras, was the fact that because I write 80 to 90% of everything I perform, it is a thrill and a half to be able to put all this brand new music in front of an orchestra and hear it played back to me. That is one of my great life's privileges. And people, my friends just say, what must that be like? And I know how fortunate I am to be able to hear all this brand new stuff, performed by some of the greatest musicians in the world. So there you go.
And this question is for both of you. John would like to know, what has been your most memorable, unique venue in which you performed or conducted?
Matt, do you want to go first?
Sure. I was very lucky when I was with the Honolulu Symphony back in the early 2000s. We were, the orchestra was in good health at the time. And a good friend of mine was working for Disney at the time. And he gave me a call and he said, I got something coming up here. I wanted to see if you'd be interested. They just did this movie called Pearl Harbor. And they want to premiere it in Hawaii. And I would like for you to take your Honolulu Symphony POPS and perform with us live on an aircraft carrier that Disney is renting, that they're going to dock in the middle of Pearl Harbor, facing the Arizona and the Missouri. And needless to say, we did it. And that is probably my biggest memory, is to be, and they have all the Pearl Harbor survivors there and the cast in the movie. And we were on an aircraft carrier facing the USS Arizona. It was, equal parts complete, just humble wow to be there with the survivors and all that. And then the other part of it is like, wow, I'm on an aircraft carrier with a symphony orchestra. This is pretty cool. So anyway, that's mine.
I can't top that. I've never been on an aircraft carrier, not even played on it. No, I think one of the best halls that I've performed at was actually Carnegie Hall. It's really an amazing space to play in. You hear really well on stage. It sounds awesome in the audience. So this is one. And the other one that I will never forget is when I was like 12 years old, I sang in the church in Dresden. And it was like, its church is like 4,000 people sit there. And I was all the way on top where the organ is. And I felt really like the sound was just sailing like through the space. It was one of the most impressive experiences for me, just because of the sound. I was teeny tiny, thin guy, and how sound can develop. That was really, really fascinating to me.
Great. All right, we have time for one more question, and it's from Cindy. Are there artistic projects you haven't yet done or look forward to realizing? And this is for both of you.
Well, I'll go only because I've already talked about it. That's the project that I'm involved right now. Has been the project I've been wanting to do literally since I was a teenager. Because Eckart asked me about how proud I am of the Polynesian heritage. Well, I was also proud of performing with my mother, and she's the first one that stuck me on stage when I was 15 years old and said, "You're conducting this band for me," and that's the first time I ever conducted, ironically, in Hawaii, and so that to and Eckart mentioned Carnegie Hall. I was able to do a tribute to my mom in Carnegie Hall. I wasn't conducting; I was singing in Carnegie Hall to honor my mother in this Frank Sinatra music celebration. So this is the project I've always wanted to do. So I hope that answers the question right there for me.
And my dream project for the Long Beach Symphony, you know, it got canceled last season or this season, and I'm really looking forward to doing it next season. That is Violins of Hope, the violins that were played during the Holocaust, because I'm always, you know, looking for ways to humanize music. That an instrument is not just an instrument, and music is not just something that happens on stage, but it's very, very deep in us. And when you connect it to souls and to destinies, and then music becomes receives a whole different dimension. And that's what I'm interested in. And so, and hopefully we can make this happen next season.
Wonderful. That was the last question we have time for today. Thank you to our audience for your great questions and for tuning into Musically Speaking today. We look forward to bringing you our next program in a few weeks, featuring the brilliant Emmy Award-winning composer John Weinglass. Thank you so much to Eckart and Matt for joining us today. We really enjoyed learning more about you, and we look forward to welcoming you back here on stage with the Long Beach Symphony very soon.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and be well.
You too.